Total scandal in the luxury restaurant. A wealthy woman mercilessly humiliates a waitress in front of everyone, unleashing unexpected chaos. But what no one saw coming was the intervention of a global star. Who do you think put the arrogant Victoria in her place? You'll be surprised by how it all ended in a twist no one will ever forget. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching us from. The sound of Victoria's heels echoed firmly against the polished floor of the restaurant, marking her entrance as if it were a triumphant march. Behind her friends, all carrying the same haughty attitude, walked as if the world belonged to them. The soft light from the crystal chandeliers cast an artificial glow on their dresses, but it was not the opulence of the place that dominated the scene. It was the confidence, almost arrogance, emanating from the group. Victoria led the small procession, her gaze fixed, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, as if she were used to the world acclaiming her. The conversations in the restaurant momentarily faded when her laughter, too loud and carefree, cut through the air like a gust of wind. People turned, some surprised, others uncomfortable, as if the echoes of her laughter stretched the atmosphere to a point where attention became inevitable. Murmurs began to rise from every corner. The diners couldn't help but watch, as if, somehow, the charged air demanded they take notice of what was happening. The women, not only because of their presence, but also the audacity they projected, effortlessly commanded the center of attention. The waiter, a young man with his hair carefully slicked back, observed them cautiously, aware of the tense atmosphere they had brought with them. He gave them a slight nod, but his professionalism was undeniable. "The corner table or the central one?" he asked, gesturing toward two options in the elegant dining area. One near the window, the other more secluded, with less visibility. Victoria frowned, her expression turning severe as she glanced at the more distant table. With a dismissive gesture, she waved her hand as if shooing away a fly. "Is that all you have? I don't have time to sit in a corner," she said, raising her voice. Her friends looked at her, exchanging pleased smiles, well aware of the force Victoria imposed in every interaction. The waiter hesitated, but his training kept him composed. "I'm very sorry, ma'am, but those are the tables available at the moment. You may wait a little if you prefer." The tension in the air was palpable. The nearby tables fell silent, and the once indifferent faces were now filled with anticipation. However, what no one expected, not even Victoria's own friends, was what would happen next. From a distance, Clara observed Victoria and immediately sensed she carried bad energy. Her experience told her that unexpected things could happen with people like that. Part of her thoughts were on a family situation that kept her tense, and the last thing she needed was to deal with a difficult customer. She turned back toward the kitchen, hoping she wouldn't be assigned to that table. But her hope was short-lived when the manager called for her specifically to serve them. He knew of her composure, but what he didn't know was the tension she had been carrying inside due to her family situation. Clara approached with a firm step, but her heart was racing. In her hand, she carried the menu, ready to hand it over and give the usual greeting, the one that would mark the beginning of another night in her service routine. But something in the air told her that this time would be different. Victoria, at the front of the group, did not lift her gaze. She simply looked past her, as if Clara did not exist. Victoria's eyes, cold and disdainful, swept across the room without the slightest courtesy toward the waitress, who, as protocol dictated, approached to offer her the menu. The contempt was immediate. Clara stopped abruptly, feeling as if a wave of cold had passed through her. It was not the first time she had faced an uncomfortable situation, but something about Victoria's attitude left a bitter taste in her mouth. Victoria's group of friends followed their leader's gaze, laughing without restraint, as if they were on a stage where Clara was nothing more than a worthless prop. However, Clara did not waver. She took a deep breath and, with the politeness she had been taught since her first day as a waitress, she offered the menu with a professional smile. But Victoria's words never reached her ears. The disdain was palpable in the air. She couldn't help it. The knot in her stomach grew tighter. "You know, Clara," one of Victoria's friends murmured, barely audible but as clear as crystal, "I think this girl's uniform is straight out of a 1940s movie." The laughter that followed, small but malicious, cut through the air like a sharp knife. Without changing a single muscle in her face, Clara placed the menu on the table with a fluid and elegant motion, but inside, a storm was raging. She could feel the pressure on her shoulders, as if all the eyes from the other tables had settled on her. But she was not going to yield. Not today. "Anything else, ladies?" she asked in a calm voice, her words as precise and controlled as the movement of her hand as she set down the menu. Without waiting for a response, she took a step back and walked away, but the echo of Victoria's friend's laughter still resonated in her mind, like a threat, like a reminder that, though she was there to serve, not all battles were visible. As Clara walked back to the kitchen, she was surprised at herself for having tolerated the mockery. The tension was building, and she could only hope that the situation would not escalate, pushing her to her limits. Clara walked toward the table again, a tray of cold water in her hands. Drops of condensation slid down the glass, a reminder of the brief calm before facing Victoria and her group once more. Upon arriving, Victoria did not lift her gaze, but her eyes narrowed with disdain at the sight of Clara standing there. A slight smile of superiority appeared on her lips before she spoke. "You know, Clara," she began, her tone as sharp as a knife, "is it really that hard to bring water in less than 10 minutes? You seem more interested in watching the clock than doing your job." Victoria's friends watched with interest. Some covered their mouths to stifle laughter, while others simply enjoyed the spectacle. Clara, however, couldn't help but feel as if the weight of the world were crashing down on her. A tight knot formed in her stomach, but she couldn't show weakness. She had to keep her composure. "My apologies, ma'am," Clara said with a forced smile as she placed the glasses of water in front of the women. Every word cost her more than she wanted to admit. Victoria's tone, so full of contempt, made her doubt her own professionalism. Was she really that bad at her job? Was there something she could have done better? But she couldn't afford to question herself now. She had to keep going, just a little longer. Victoria's group of friends let out a soft laugh that lingered in the air like a subtle mockery. "Look, she even apologizes." "How sad," one of them murmured mockingly, loud enough for Clara to hear clearly. Clara felt the heat of their gazes on her. Her hands trembled slightly, but she disguised it by adjusting the tray on her arm. Everything in the room seemed to have come to a halt, and despite her attempts to stay calm, the discomfort became increasingly palpable. As she took a step back, Clara felt Victoria's gaze piercing her back. The echo of their laughter kept ringing in her mind, dragging her into a place where the air felt heavy. She wanted to disappear, but she held her ground, even though everything inside her screamed to stop, to walk away, because she had already endured more than she could. That small voice that had always pushed her forward told her she had to endure, just for a moment longer. But as she walked away, a question lingered in her mind, cold and painful. Is this all? Or are more humiliations waiting for me? The uncertainty grew, like a shadow stretching with every step she took. She knew that if this didn't end soon, something inside her might break. And yet, as she glanced at Victoria's group of friends, she felt that the worst blow was still yet to come. Clara took a deep breath before returning to Victoria's table. Her mind wavered between the need to remain professional and the feeling that every step she took brought her closer to humiliation. Upon arriving, she found Victoria once again in her rigid posture, as if Clara's mere presence was ruining her evening. "Do you have the food yet?" Victoria asked, her voice laden with impatience. It wasn't a question, but a demand in disguise. Clara quickly jotted down the order, her pencil pressing against the paper harder than she had intended. But upon hearing Victoria's authoritarian tone, something inside her ignited. It wasn't just the food that Victoria demanded, it was respect, and that, Clara knew, she did not have. The weight of Victoria's gaze pierced through her, and for a second, she remained motionless, battling the emotions that threatened to cloud her judgment. Victoria, as if she could read her mind, raised an eyebrow. "Don't you know what speed is?" she said, without even looking directly at Clara, keeping her gaze on her friends, as if Clara were nothing more than an accessory to the evening. The echo of her words filled the air, while the clinking of glasses and silverware faded into a distant murmur. Clara forced herself to smile, but something in the atmosphere had shifted. The murmuring from the other tables grew louder with each passing second. A few glances were exchanged. Some began to whisper, others stole sidelong glances, as if waiting for the tension between the two women to explode at any moment. The discomfort seeped into every corner of the restaurant, like an invisible shroud spreading rapidly. A child, seated at a nearby table, dropped his fork, making the sound echo louder than it should have. One of Victoria's friends let out a laugh, but it was forced, as if she were trying to ease the discomfort of everyone present. Yet that only heightened the tension. Every giggle, every whisper became part of an echo that took over the air, making Clara feel even more exposed. How far would this go? How much more could she endure? The questions weighed on her mind. But she knew that, at least for now, she could do nothing but move forward, maintain her composure, for the sake of the restaurant, for the sake of her job. But something inside her, told her that this was no longer just about another meal. The power struggle had begun, and she wasn't sure who would take the lead in this war. Clara moved forward with the plate in her hand, balancing it with the precision of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. The porcelain was still releasing steam, and the aroma of the perfectly cooked steak floated in the air. She paused for a second before reaching Victoria's table, adjusted her expression, and carefully placed the plate in front of the woman. Victoria observed it with an air of disinterest. She didn't look up, only slid the tip of her fork over the meat, as if she were examining a poorly executed work of art. "It's cold," she declared, her voice devoid of emotion. Clara felt a knot in her stomach. The plate was hot. She knew it. She had taken it straight from the kitchen, barely able to hold it by the edges without burning herself. But Victoria wasn't looking for a perfect meal. She was looking for something else, something only she understood. "I'll take it back to the kitchen," Clara said, with a calmness she didn't feel. Victoria smiled, satisfied. Clara picked up the plate with calculated movements and turned on her heels. She didn't rush, but she also didn't allow herself to hesitate. She walked with her eyes fixed on the kitchen door, ignoring the weight of the stairs upon her. Inside, the noise of the chefs at work filled the air. Steam, shouted orders, the sizzling of meat on the grills. A controlled chaos. Again, Matteo, the head chef, asked when he saw her enter with the untouched plate. Clara placed it on the service table with more force than necessary. "She says it's cold." Matteo frowned and touched the edge of the plate. "It's scorching." Clara exhaled in frustration and crossed her arms. "I know, but try telling her that." One of the kitchen assistants, a new guy who had only been there for 2 weeks, glanced nervously at the door. "Is that the customer who's been complaining since she arrived?" Clara nodded. The atmosphere in the kitchen shifted. Everyone knew who Victoria was. They had all felt the tension in the restaurant, the growing discomfort with every one of her remarks. Matteo took the plate and slid it back under the intense heat of the grill. 30 more seconds of infernal heat. Let's see if that satisfies her. Clara smiled, though without any real humor. 30 seconds later, she took the plate and, with a renewed air of forced professionalism, returned to the dining area. As she moved forward, she felt the conversations quiet down, the gazes following her. The other restaurant employees watched her from their stations, some with sympathy, others with anticipation. The air was charged with something electric, as if everyone knew the night had yet to reach its most critical point. Clara reached Victoria's table. "Here is your plate, ma'am," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. Victoria looked at her, her smile barely perceptible, her eyes assessing her like a predator enjoying the game. She picked up her fork. Slowly, she sank it into the meat. And then, without taking a bite, she lifted her gaze and let out a sigh of feigned exasperation. "We'll see if it's finally how it should be." Clara didn't blink. She didn't react. But inside, something told her this wasn't over yet. Clara had barely placed the plate in front of Victoria when the woman tilted her head and examined her with a mocking smile. "Do you always stand like that?" she suddenly blurted out, crossing her arms over her chest. "You look like a park statue, but with a wrinkled apron." Victoria's friends let out muffled laughs. Clara felt a prick of discomfort in her back, like a needle had been driven into her spine. "And that hairstyle," Victoria continued, leaning slightly forward, her eyes gleaming with malice. "God, how depressing. Don't they have mirrors in the kitchen?" The laughter grew louder. Clara felt her throat tighten, but she kept her expression neutral. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her react. Maybe if she smiled more, one of Victoria's friends added, casually taking her wine glass, she'd look less, miserable. The group laughed as if they were watching a private show. Clara felt heat rising in her cheeks, the burn of embarrassment surging like an unstoppable wave. Suddenly, a sharp sound broke through the air, a piece of cutlery striking the table. Clara didn't turn her head, but she felt it. The energy in the room had shifted. At a nearby table, a middle-aged man had set his fork down on his plate with too much force. His jaw was tense, and his dark eyes moved between Victoria and Clara, a mix of annoyance and hesitation in his gaze. For a moment, it seemed like he was about to say something, that he was going to stand up to intervene. But he didn't. Instead, he exhaled slowly and took his wine glass, drinking as he stared at the table, as if trying to convince himself that this wasn't his concern. Clara felt her stomach tighten. She couldn't blame him. No one wanted to be Victoria's next target, and Victoria knew it. That's why she kept smiling. Victoria picked up her wine glass with elegance, twirling it between her fingers as if she were assessing its quality. "You know, Clara," she said with a slow smile, like a predator enjoying its prey, "there's something about that uniform that doesn't quite convince me." Clara felt the danger in the air before it happened. Victoria tilted the glass. The red wine fell in one swift motion, a crimson stream sliding down Clara's white apron, soaking it instantly. The sound of liquid splashing against the fabric was so sharp that it seemed to drown out everything else in the restaurant. Clara didn't move. She didn't gasp, didn't step back, didn't raise her voice. She just watched. She watched the wine spread across her uniform, dripping in small, dark rivulets. The laughter began around her, first as muffled giggles, then as full-blown laughter. "Oh no," one of Victoria's friends murmured, bringing a hand to her mouth in exaggerated shock. "How clumsy of you, Victoria." "God, Clara, didn't they teach you how to dodge?" another one added, her eyes sparkling with amusement. Victoria leaned back, relaxed, her now empty glass resting on the table. "Looks like you really do need a uniform change now," she said sweetly, as if she were truly concerned. The entire restaurant was on edge. Some diners pretended not to have seen anything, retreating into their conversations. Others watched from the corner of their eyes, expectant. In the distance, a waiter saw the scene and reacted immediately. He moved quickly, a clean cloth in hand, ready to help. But when he got close enough, Clara raised a hand. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him. The waiter froze in place. Clara's expression wasn't one of humiliation, not even of anger. It was something more dangerous, something Victoria had yet to understand. Silence fell over the restaurant like contained thunder. Cutlery stopped clinking against plates. Conversations were cut in half. Even the background music seemed to fade. All eyes were on Clara. She remained there, her apron stained with wine, her face unchanging. She didn't tremble. She didn't step back. She didn't react the way Victoria wanted, and that infuriated her. Victoria narrowed her eyes, drumming her fingers on the table. "What's wrong?" she said with a fake smile. "Are you all waiting for her to cry?" No one laughed, not even her friends. A murmur rippled through the room. People whispering to each other. Customers exchanging glances. The air was thick with the tension of something about to break. And then someone stood up. From a nearby table, a man pushed his chair back with a sharp noise. Tall, dressed in a dark suit, his graying hair perfectly combed. His presence filled the room effortlessly. He looked at Victoria with an expression of absolute contempt. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Victoria held his gaze for a second. Then she looked away. The murmurs grew louder. Something was shifting in the room. Clara felt the weight of the attention on her. And for the first time that night, she knew. The power in the room no longer belonged to Victoria. Clara felt a heat rising in her chest. Her arm moved on reflex, a whip of contained rage. It wasn't a clenched fist, nor an aggressive gesture, but for an instant, her muscles tensed as if her body were ready to defend itself. Victoria saw it, and she seized the moment. "Did you see that?" she exclaimed, placing a hand on her chest, as if she had just dodged a bullet. "She tried to attack me." The gazes in the room sharpened. Clara felt a chill run through her. "That's not true." Her voice was firm, but the air was too charged. "I demand that she be fired right now." Victoria slammed her palm on the table. "This is outrageous. A restaurant of my caliber cannot afford violent employees." The word violent hung in the air like a venomous accusation. At that moment, the manager appeared. Short, ill-fitted suit, a bead of sweat sliding down his temple. Nervous. Very nervous. "Good evening, ladies," he said with a tense smile. "Can I help with anything?" Victoria shot him a glare. "Yes. You can do your job and fire this waitress. Right now." The manager blinked, looking at Clara, then at Victoria, then back at Clara. The silence in the room was no longer just discomfort. It was expectation. But then something broke the balance. A murmur. Not one, but several. A table in the corner. Then another. A whisper growing like an echo. "This is ridiculous." A woman muttered loud enough to be heard. "Poor girl. Do they really think they'll fire her for this? I wouldn't come back if they did." The words floated in the air like burning embers. And Victoria, for the first time that night, felt that the fire was no longer on her side. Victoria narrowed her eyes and let out a venomous whisper. Unbelievable. The things one has to endure from incompetent people. She wasn't speaking to anyone in particular, but she made sure everyone could hear her. Her wine glass clinked against the plate as she set it down on the table. "Just look at this," she continued, with an air of disgust. "A manager who doesn't know how to run his own restaurant. How shameful." The manager remained still. His jaw tightened. His hand, which had been holding a pen, clenched until his knuckles turned white. "Ma'am," he said in a tone that tried to be diplomatic but trembled with the edge of frustration. "I understand that the situation has not been to your liking, but—" Victoria scoffed. "Not been to my liking," she repeated, mocking. "Oh, please. This is a disaster. I wouldn't be surprised if this place shuts down in less than a month." Victoria's friends shifted in their seats. One of them looked away. Another pretended to check her phone. The manager took a deep breath. "This restaurant has values, ma'am, and one of them is respect." Victoria arched an eyebrow. "Are you giving me a speech?" "I am ensuring that there will be no unjustified dismissals." A flash of fury crossed Victoria's face. The entire restaurant remained silent. Clara, standing a few steps from a table, felt a knot tightening in her stomach. Her skin burned. Not from embarrassment, from helplessness. She needed to get away, to breathe. She couldn't afford to break now. She turned around and walked toward the kitchen with measured steps. The murmurs followed her like shadows. "Poor girl. She's about to explode. I would have left long ago." Clara pushed the door open with slightly more force than necessary. The cold metal against her palms anchored her for a second. She inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly. Once, twice. As soon as Clara stepped into the kitchen, she felt several gazes on her. Then, without warning, Miguel, the chef, let a knife fall onto the cutting board with a sharp thud and muttered, "If I had to endure what you did out there, we'd already be on the news." Sophia, one of the waitresses, patted her on the back. "You're a rock, Clara. I don't know how you didn't smash a plate in her face." "Believe me, it wasn't easy," Clara replied with a weak but genuine smile. The dishwasher, a boy no older than 20, gave her a thumbs up. "To me, you're already a legend." A couple of laughs broke the tension. And for the first time all night, Clara felt she wasn't alone. Clara let out a shaky sigh and leaned against the wall, feeling the tension coursing through her arms. "I had to get out," she murmured, her voice breaking. "One more minute out there, and I don't know if I could have held on." Sophia noticed Clara's fingers involuntarily clenching into fists and, without hesitation, wrapped her in a warm hug. "I need to calm down," Clara whispered, almost as if trying to convince herself. "And you will," Sophia said softly, pulling back just enough to look her in the eyes. "Besides, don't forget we have the pool outing with the guys this weekend. No stress, just water, sun, and laughter." Clara exhaled, letting the image of a relaxing day pull her away from the chaos. "That sounds amazing. And it will be. But first, breathe," she winked. "And don't let that which ruin your night." Clara let out a brief laugh, feeling, for the first time that night, that her world wasn't falling apart. But the night wasn't over yet. Victoria let out a loud, shrill laugh, throwing her head back with exaggerated nonchalance. Her laughter bounced off the restaurant walls, dragging along the forced laughter of her friends. They exchanged glances filled with a mix of discomfort and blind loyalty, as if caught in a web of false amusement. "God, did you see the waitress's face when I told her to bring another glass?" Victoria sneered, swirling her wine glass with disdain. She looked like she was about to cry. None of them responded with genuine enthusiasm, but the nervous twitch of their lips pretended they were enjoying the show. The restaurant's warm lighting barely softened the coldness in their expressions. From her table, Taylor Swift watched the scene in silence. Her fingers drummed against the table's surface with a slow rhythm, her clenched jaw barely betraying her growing discomfort. Her steel blue eyes followed Victoria's every move with surgical precision, noting every small sign of arrogance, every word laced with venom. Taylor's discomfort did not go unnoticed. A few meters away, the waiter on duty, a young man with curly hair and a spotless apron, caught the tension reflected on her face. He hesitated for a moment before cautiously approaching, holding his tray with steady hands. "Miss Swift," he said in a measured voice, "do you need anything?" Taylor lifted her gaze, her eyes lingering on Victoria's table for a brief second before focusing on the waiter. Her smile was polite, but there was a spark of determination in her gaze, as if a decision had already formed in her mind. "No, thank you," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "I'm just watching." The waiter nodded slowly, but before stepping away, his voice dropped just below the ambient noise. "If there's anything I can do, let me know." Taylor held his gaze for a moment, weighing the weight of his words. Then, with a slight tilt of her head, she let out a brief smile. "I'll keep that in mind." The waiter walked away, but the electricity in the air continued to build. Something was about to happen. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath as Taylor Swift stood up. Her movement was slow, calculated, as if she were measuring each step before taking it. She didn't need to announce herself. Her mere presence was enough to capture everyone's attention. The murmurs intensified within seconds. "Is that her? Is she going over there? Oh my God, this is getting good." Voices blended with the faint sound of silverware being placed on plates and chairs shifting slightly as some patrons tried to get a better view. Even the waiters paused, watching with the same mix of awe and anticipation. Victoria, completely oblivious to the commotion unfolding around her, remained focused on her group of friends. She maintained her air of superiority, as if nothing could disturb her bubble of arrogance. She played with her wine glass, sliding her fingers along the rim, smiling with false confidence as she tried to ignore the growing unease reflected in her companions' faces. As Taylor got closer, the air grew even heavier. Victoria's friends, visibly uncomfortable, exchanged furtive glances toward the figure approaching with unhurried but absolute determination. Yet Victoria remained unaware of the immediate tension. But the silence was thickening. Something in the air had changed, and then she felt it. Victoria played with the wine glass between her fingers, feigning disinterest. Her lips curved into an almost lazy smile, as if nothing happening around her affected her in the slightest. But her jaw tightened for just a second, imperceptible to most, when her gaze caught sight of a silhouette approaching. The murmuring in the restaurant had changed. It was no longer just the whispers of entertained spectators, but a different kind of murmur, charged with anticipation. Something was happening. Her friends sensed it before she did. Their conversations evaporated into the air, their bodies stiffened, as if a shadow had fallen over the table. And then Victoria saw her. Taylor Swift advanced calmly, her stride confident, her expression neutral but firm. The singer was in no hurry, but she didn't hesitate with each step she took. Every table she passed fell silent, as if the very air was holding its breath. Victoria's group of friends, who just minutes ago had shared laughter and complicit glances, now looked like a row of statues, frozen between disbelief and fear. No one dared to speak. No one dared to move. They only watched, as if the entire world had shrunk to the distance between Taylor and Victoria. Victoria cleared her throat softly, as if trying to break the tension. She straightened in her seat and lifted her chin, attempting to regain control of the situation. It was her, after all, the woman who always dictated the rules, the one who never allowed herself to be intimidated. But when her gaze met Taylor's, she felt a different kind of chill run down her spine. The singer's confidence didn't stem from a defiant attitude or loud words. She didn't need to raise her voice or impose herself with exaggerated gestures. There was something in her gaze, something deep, unshakable. A silent judgment, an immovable conviction. And for the first time in a long while, Victoria felt the mask she had worn so well begin to crack. Victoria watched with a mix of disbelief and confusion as Taylor slid effortlessly into the seat beside her. She hadn't asked for permission. She hadn't hesitated. She simply took her place, as if she had always belonged at that table. The silence felt like a taut rope about to snap. No one dared to speak. Victoria's friends darted glances between the singer and their leader, waiting for her reaction. But Victoria didn't react immediately. She merely narrowed her eyes, as if analyzing the situation, trying to decide how to regain control. Taylor took her time. There was no rush in her expression. With a casual gesture, she adjusted a napkin on her lap. Then, she rested her elbows on the table, intertwining her fingers. She still said nothing. The absence of words was, in itself, a sharp weapon. Victoria felt the weight of everyone's attention on her. She tried to relax, straightening her back with a rehearsed elegance. If Taylor expected her to feel intimidated, she was mistaken. Or, at least, that's what she wanted to believe. One of her friends, a redhead with a flawless manicure, cleared her throat softly, but no one paid attention. Another, the quietest of the group, slid her phone discreetly onto her lap and began typing. Perhaps a message. Perhaps an attempt to record what was happening. The stares of the other restaurant patrons remained fixed on the scene. The murmur that had once filled the space had completely faded. Finally, Taylor lifted her gaze and smiled slightly, with an expression that didn't quite match the tension of the moment. It was a calm smile, almost kind, but her eyes spoke of something else. Victoria felt a shiver run down her spine. Victoria narrowed her eyes, the corner of her lips curving into a sharp smile. The air at the table was dense. Every breath seemed like a deafening sound in the midst of the uncomfortable silence that had enveloped the group. Finally, she decided to break the tension with her most reliable weapon, sarcasm. "Well, I suppose you're the morality police now, aren't you, Taylor?" she said, her tone dripping with mockery. "Are you going to give me a lesson on good manners while dining in a luxury restaurant?" How ironic. But she had barely finished speaking when Taylor raised a hand, calm yet firm, stopping her advance, as if she were a conductor silencing an out-of-place note. "Respect is more important than money," Taylor said with cutting tranquility. The words slid between those present with the sharpness of a well-honed knife. There was no need to raise her voice or embellish them with further explanations. They were an irrefutable truth that fell on Victoria like a slab of stone. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't know what to say. Her friends' gazes were fixed on Victoria, expectant, as if they wanted to see how she would react to something she could neither buy nor manipulate. Victoria leaned slightly back in her chair, crossing her arms with apparent indifference. Her eyes swept over the table as if searching for support among her friends, but none dared to meet her gaze. Then, with an exaggerated sigh, she rolled her eyes and smiled smugly. "Oh, please," she said, in a tone meant to sound casual. "This is ridiculous. All this fuss over a simple waitress who doesn't do her job properly? Honestly, Taylor, I thought you had better things to do than meddle in such trivial matters." Her laugh, light and derisive, rose above the tense silence of the restaurant. But it didn't last long. Taylor, with the patience of someone who knows they have already won, tilted her head and slid her phone across the table, the screen glowing with the video playing. Trivial. Taylor didn't raise her voice, but the calm with which she uttered the words sent a chill down Victoria's spine. Taylor tapped the screen with her finger, and the video began to play. The image was unmistakable. Victoria, with her air of superiority, throwing her glass of wine at Clara, followed by her cruel remarks. The sound of a notification interrupted the moment. Then another, and another. At first, scattered. Then, like an uncontrollable symphony, phones began buzzing and ringing at the nearby tables. Murmurs, curious glances. Customers exchange screens, showing the same video from different angles. Some were recording the scene live, completing the humiliation in real time. Victoria narrowed her eyes and unlocked her phone with a mechanical gesture. The screen lit up, revealing an avalanche of notifications. Twitter, Instagram, even her WhatsApp were flooded with messages. Her right eyebrow arched in disdain as she opened the first app. At Vero Delujo, did anyone else see the video of this woman humiliating the waitress? Disgusting. At Justicia Social, no matter how much money you have, respect is earned, not bought. Hashtag Victoria Humiliates. Her face paled. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through the comments, all mercilessly condemning her. Some with direct insults, others with biting sarcasm. Her breathing quickened. She couldn't afford this. Her eyes widened as she opened Instagram. Her face, frozen in an arrogant expression, appeared in an endless stream of shared stories. In each one, the same video. Her disdain toward Clara, the waitress, her scornful tone, the look of horror on the diners' faces. And worse, Taylor Swift intervening. It wasn't just an incident. It was a scandal. The murmuring at the table faded as her friends noticed her expression. Alicia, seated to her right, frowned and gripped her wine glass with unsteady hands. "Everything okay, Vic?" she asked quietly. Victoria didn't respond immediately. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She clenched her phone tightly, as if she could crush the evidence in her palm. Silence stretched between them. Finally, she lifted her gaze and saw the expectant faces of her group. Paula looked away, pretending to focus on the restaurant's decor. Sophia played with the cloth napkin, folding and unfolding it with nervous hands. No one wanted to be the first to speak. The tension thickened like a heavy fog between them. "It's an exaggeration," Victoria tried to say with a forced laugh, but her voice came out strained. Victoria felt a cold emptiness in her stomach. Her phone, gripped tightly between her fingers, trembled slightly. Her eyes scanned the screen with a mix of horror and desperation as the comments continued to pour in relentlessly. What a disgrace. So this is how the elite behaves. Someone record her reaction now. Unbelievable what people do to feel superior. Her face, usually radiant with confidence and arrogance, turned pale as marble. Her lips parted, but no words came out. In her chest, an oppressive weight grew heavier with every notification lighting up the screen. One after another, the networks flooded with videos, screenshots, and comments exposing her without mercy. Victoria's friends exchanged uncomfortable glances, but the messages kept coming. Relentless, cruel, incisive. This is why people hate the rich. There's no class that money can buy. I hope the waitress spat in her food. Victoria felt a cold sweat at the nape of her neck. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to lift her chin, to maintain composure. But the pressure was unbearable. Her hands, once firm and calculating, now barely managed to hold the phone. From the bar, a tall, slender waiter observed the scene. His eyes swept over Victoria's unhinged expression, the uncomfortable silence at the table, and finally landed on Clara, who remained standing with her fists clenched against her apron. He approached her cautiously, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you need help?" he asked discreetly, leaning slightly toward her. Clara blinked, surprised. She hadn't expected anyone else to get involved, not after Taylor had already intervened. She allowed herself a moment to observe the waiter. His expression was neutral, but his eyes held a subtle concern. "I'm fine," she murmured, though her voice lacked conviction. The waiter nodded slowly, keeping his gaze on Victoria, who now seemed trapped in a whirlwind of messages attacking her from her own screen. Clara felt a small wave of relief. For the first time all night, the balance wasn't tilted in Victoria's favor. The tension in the restaurant was almost tangible. It lingered in the air, in the way conversations had died down to expectant murmurs, in how eyes discreetly flicked toward the scene, eager for the next development. And Victoria knew it. Every move she made, every blink, every shallow breath was being watched, judged, and shared in real time. She felt exposed to the world. And worst of all, there was nothing she could do to stop it. Victoria felt her throat go dry. The screen of her phone kept lighting up with relentless notifications, each one a dagger of contempt. Her friends, who just minutes ago had been sharing laughter and camaraderie with her, now had their eyes glued to their own screens. The video's virality had reached them all. "Vic, we have to do something," Amanda whispered, trying to stay calm, though her voice trembled slightly. "We can talk to management, clear everything up." Victoria shot her a withering look. "Clear up what?" she snapped, her tone no longer as fierce as before. Her voice had cracks. Amanda glanced around nervously. The other customers kept watching, some with furrowed brows, others barely hiding satisfied smiles. But the worst part was the phones. From different angles, like relentless witnesses, they kept recording. Victoria tried to smile. She did so with the same arrogance with which she had entered the restaurant. But now her mouth trembled. Her eyes darted between the phones surrounding her, each one with a camera ready to capture her downfall. It was a spectacle, and she was the protagonist. Her friends looked away, uncomfortable, as if hoping everything would vanish into thin air. But the comments kept pouring onto her phone, each one a slap in the face. "This is insane," she murmured, though it wasn't clear if she was speaking to them or to herself. She clung to her wine glass as if it were a lifeline. Meanwhile, Taylor Swift, unshaken, turned to Clara. Her presence, serene yet imposing, was enough to keep the atmosphere suspended in tension. The singer was in no hurry, nor did she need to raise her voice. The entire restaurant was in her hands. "Are you okay?" Taylor asked, her voice low but clear. Clara could barely nod. She wasn't used to having someone defend her, even less so against a customer like Victoria. She felt a lump in her throat, but it wasn't fear. It was relief. Taylor gave her a faint smile and patted her arm, brief but meaningful. "Don't let people like her make you doubt your worth," she told her. And though her words were soft, everyone in the restaurant heard them, as if they were a final verdict. Victoria clicked her tongue. Her smile had lost its shape. It had turned into a tense grimace. The air around her had become suffocating. She looked around desperately, searching for an escape. The other customers made no effort to hide their fascination. Some watched openly. Others recorded with their phones from strategic angles. The murmurs swelled in waves, a tide of anticipation. "This isn't what it looks like," Victoria tried to say, her voice barely a whisper. But no one listened. Or, worse, no one believed her. The tension was a living thing, breathing between the tables, waiting for the next move. And everyone knew the next move was Victoria's. Victoria felt the room shrink around her. Her hands trembled over the screen of her phone, where the comments kept flooding in like an unstoppable avalanche. Her smile, a desperate attempt to maintain composure, crumbled with every passing second. The pressure in her chest became unbearable. But then, the sound of a notification stood out amidst the chaos. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the sender, her father. She opened the message with numb fingers. "Victoria, what the hell did you do?" The text read, short, cold, lethal. The blood drained completely from her face. Her father was the kind of man who guarded his image like a jeweler guards his diamonds. And now, She had turned their last name into a synonym for viral cruelty. The air grew heavier. The stares fixed on her no longer came just from the restaurant patrons. At a corner table, a man with a professional camera was aiming directly at her. He wasn't just a casual onlooker. No, he was a reporter. "Excuse me," the journalist dared to say, rising from his seat. "Would you like to share your side of the story before this goes public? Because I assure you, it will be on every news outlet tomorrow." If this story moved you, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss more inspiring content. Share this video with friends and family who need to see stories that challenge perspectives and leave an indelible mark. Explore our channel to discover stories that inspire and transform. Until the next video. The ground seemed to vanish beneath her feet. She wanted to respond, defend herself, say something, but her throat closed up. Taylor Swift, on the other hand, said nothing. She merely watched. She knew there was no need to push someone who was already falling. Victoria felt a knot in her stomach. For the first time in her life, the world was not turning in her favor.